Hello, everybody, and welcome to an episode of the Best Games period. I totally just blanked on what number this episode is. I think it's 133, but don't quote me on that one.
Sounds right.
I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me this week is Marcus Stewart. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, this is kind of an impromptu episode. We didn't really plan on putting together until kind of the last minute, but that's kind of in line with our show. So,
yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, just here, episode 1, would you say 33? Is that where we're going with?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, this is, I'm really happy. I've been really looking forward to the 133rd episode, and
it's a pretty big honor.
That was my, 133, just a delve into my life is my favorite number. So
is it?
Yeah, it's got everything you could ever want in a number. It's got a 1 in there, and not 1 but 2 threes, and those are the 2 best numbers together. Finally, it's like the Avengers of numbers.
What are you talking about? The 2 threes together, or are you talking about 1 and 3?
1 and 2.
Because there are 3 numbers.
Well, it's like if you had like Iron Man and then 2 Captain Americas. There you go. Basically, that's what that number is.
Okay, cool.
I don't say I love you 3000, I say I love you 133.
Oh gosh, this is gonna be an episode, isn't it?
Here we go. Strap in, folks.
So has there anything been going on that you really want to talk about in like games or what you been playing?
I've the last game that I wrapped up most recently was Bloodstain. Have you played that yet, Bloodstain?
No, but I really want to know if it left a stain on your record.
It left a stain on my heart because I adore that game as a Castlevania fan, especially of the Igarashi, like Symphony of the Night style Castlevanias. It's basically Symphony of the Night 2 in everything but name. And yeah, I play that game religiously. Pretty much one of the few games I bought at launch and then just dropped everything else I was playing just to kind of marathon through it. And 20 hours later, I think I got like 99% of the castle completed. And yeah, I adore that game. It's one of my top 3 of the year so far. It's a phenomenal one of those if you're into Symphony of the Night.
Okay, cool. Yeah. What makes it phenomenal? Because like we saw like Mighty Number 9 kind of came out, crashed and burned.
Yeah.
And like on paper, Mighty Number 9 is like, it's what it was gonna be. It's just people didn't really seem to click with it or seem to like it all that much. And I haven't played it, but
yeah, I did.
What makes Bloodstained so much more successful, I guess?
So yeah, like the Mighty Number 9 comparisons are very apt because they're very similar stories of like, hey, the guy that's known as the mastermind of this beloved franchise leaves the parent company and says, hey, I'm going to make a new one of those. Just, I just can't use the name because I'm not at the company anymore. And the difference with Mighty Number 9 and Inafune is it's funny, they're both on Kickstarter, but the Kickstarter saga for Mighty Number 9 was kind of a comedy of errors. It was kind of on fire for most of its life, and then the game kind of reflected that. Where Bloodstained, not so much. Like, the worst you heard is like, oh, it got delayed a couple times, which, games get delayed all the time. That's not really a thing, and, they changed the art style towards the end of it to make it better, and that pretty funny video kind of promoting that. But yeah, I played Mighty Number 9. I never finished it because I agreed that game's not good. And it really just comes down to the polish. Like, Mighty Number 9 is just a bad Mega Man game. It looked bad, like, graphically. The level design was really uninspired. It didn't even play... and granted, it was trying to do a little bit... it was supposed to be a straight-up Mega Man clone, but it kind of was at the same time. Like, it just didn't... Like, it had some of its own little tweaks, but it was largely, a new Mega Man. And it just didn't... As a fan of Mega Man, it just didn't play great as a platformer or an action platformer, whereas Bloodstained, it feels so much like Symphony of the Night. Like, it plays really tight, it looks nice, The castle itself is really, really cool and creative, like all the different rooms and the puzzles, the bosses, the enemies, the music's phenomenal. It checks all those boxes that Symphony checked while still doing some really new stuff. Like it's got this like shard system where like every demon you kill gives you an ability and you can equip different sets of shards. So it gives you incentive to kill everything outside of just, getting XP to level up. So you're like, oh, I want to kill this, so I want to get all the shards for everything. And then, if you get multiple shards of the same one, it makes it stronger. So it's not like you kill the thing and get the shard and then you just never bother to mess with them again. You're like, oh, maybe I want to just keep farming this guy just to make this one ability I have better. I think that's a cool system. And yeah, it's just a better put together game overall. it really is. Like it's something else. I think it's one of the year's best games.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. I haven't been playing much aside from Final Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But I did wrap up Cadence of Hyrule, which is a really great game, and I am planning on writing a review of it. But yeah, it's basically everything I loved from Crypt of the Necrodancer, just applied to a Zelda game, and it's great and pretty much perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from like maybe it could have been longer and maybe a little bit better like side content, I guess. But other than that, it's pretty much a pitch perfect game that feels amazing on the Switch. So
yeah,
two thumbs up.
So Cadence of Hyrule is technically a new Zelda game.
Very technically. I think technically the full title is Crypt of the Necrodancer, Cadence of Hyrule, but
I'm just saying, I want to ask, like, where does it fit in the Zelda timeline?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty interesting, because it's like, if it is in the official Zelda timeline, it might be the first time a character from a non-Nintendo franchise crosses over into the Legend of Zelda universe.
Finally. It's like the timeline has diverged so much that it's just, alternate universes have kind of started to intersect with it.
Mm-hmm,
and, we've really been building to this moment since, 1985 when first Zelda came out? So
I mean, this is their Incredible Hulk of video games. This is where they introduce the Nick Fury character in the end credits.
Are you saying there's a scene where like Solid Snake walks into a bar and sits next to Ganondorf and it's like, I heard you got a green problem, but he's referring to Link?
I think people knew what you were referring to.
Just making sure.
Yeah, they might have assumed it was like a problem with weed or something.
Yeah. Exactly.
Don't do drugs, Ganon.
That's the only other green thing.
No, so that's really good. And I also played a game about mental illness and eating disorders that's free on Steam called Shrinking Pains. And it only takes about 20 minutes to finish. It's very good. I suggest you try it out. It's really cool.
Interesting.
Also, thought-provoking and maybe depressing and or triggering if you have problems with eating disorders.
I just wrapped up a depressing game. I finished Sea of Solitude not that long ago. So
was the sea very lonely?
It's pretty lonely outside of the like monsters representing emotional pain swimming around.
Oh no!
It's got.
I don't want to wrangle with those.
There's a lot of them. They're big. They got faces too, and they talk to you.
Oh, gross!
And tell you how terrible of a person you are.
I mean, okay, maybe that's not a game I need to play right now.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's one of those, like, it's funny that there's been a lot of games in recent years that kind of tackle a similar subject matter of like, hey, how do we personify depression and anxiety? Like, we had Celeste last year. We've had, even to a lesser extent, something like Hellblade. Just tackling mental illness. Night in the Woods is another one. And, this is in that same group of games. It's good. I liked it. I don't think it's particularly surprising, especially if you've played all those other games. You kind of know what this game's trying to say, I guess. But there are a few moments in there. It particularly had to do with a few of the performances, which aren't like spectacular, but there was a few that stood out that I was like, oh, this is hitting home in some ways. Even if it's not anything like, there's some stuff that hits home personally and some stuff that like I know like friends have gone through that I can relate to. It's a pretty game too. It's got a sharp look to it. You've seen it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the other, like, I'm not even gonna bother listing all the other games I could play because I play too many games at all times. So like in terms of stuff that I finished recently was like those two as well as Void Bastards. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah,
that game looked really fun.
That game is really fun. I recommend it.
Yeah, I wonder what it says. I always wonder if, like, when a lot of games come out about a given topic or set of topics, if that's just indicative of kind of like where like our larger society is at. Like, are all these games coming out about like people struggling with, all of this anxiety and pressure coming out because like that's just how people always are, and it's just now like games are getting to the point that it can kind of like address that topic in a nuanced way? Or is it because there's something particular about the times that we live in where there's just way more anxiety and like it's coming out in weird and unique ways because, this time is different than, say, like the 1930s where the anxieties obviously took a much different form.
Yeah, I think a little bit has to do with almost like being in a group therapy session where like it's hard to talk about that stuff publicly if you're going through it until somebody else speaks up first and kind of sets the tone, and then that kind of says that, oh, like it's okay if I do the same if that person does it and gets a positive response. And so like the game compares to be like I can't tell you what like the first one of these were because it depends on what your definition of that is, but let's say like the first big example, like somebody just does that and makes one of these games and takes off, and then other developers that had similar ideas or have share the same anxieties play that and go like, oh wow, this is actually I want to do this too, like this could be a cathartic way to express my feelings. And now everyone, and then more people may be feeling more comfortable putting themselves out there or putting even if it's not totally themselves, but just like experiences from like friends or family and saying like, I want to share these issues in this medium. Like maybe I wouldn't have felt as comfortable doing it if someone had done it before, and now that everyone's doing it, you know what I'm saying? That's kind of the idea I have of like, hey, everyone's sharing now. Like, hey, I can share too. I want to make maybe I'll make a game that talks about my own personal struggles and stuff and hope that it helps people going through the same thing.
For sure. Yeah. I don't know. There's just something that really resonated with me, like like creatures coming out of the depths and like basically your own fears confronting you and just being like, hey, you're a big piece of shit. And on the flip side of that, you have like Animal Crossing, where it's like, you don't worry about it. You're not confronted by any of that. You just, you in Animal Crossing, you're going to live in this fantasy land where, you have to pay your bills, but nothing bad happens if you don't pay them. It's okay.
Yeah. Doesn't Rossetti call you a piece of crap for not like loading into your game?
Well, he's out of a job now.
Oh, that's true. He has been replaced by a computer. There should be a cutscene where he gets a watch for all his time given. He gets the old meaningless watch and says like, all right, thanks for all your years of service. We no longer require you, but we appreciate you. And now you can go to that island and, chill out, fish, I guess. I mean, I don't know how you're getting out there. Isn't he like a mole or a gopher man?
Yeah, he's a mole.
Okay, so I guess he'll have to, he could take a boat, I guess, or tunnel very far underground, underneath the Earth's crust, across the ocean.
Yeah, as moles do.
I mean, who knows what he does? Who knows? We'll get the spinoff game of Mr. Rossetti going through his full suite of abilities.
The Mr. Rossetti game where he goes through an emotional crisis and he just goes back to Mole Town and...
Oh man, is he gonna be like the old guy in the Shawshank Redemption, the guy that like the older guy that gets out of jail and then he has a really hard time adjusting to society and then he hangs himself?
No.
Like Rossetti doesn't know what to do with himself now because he's been in the system for so long. He doesn't know how to just be a person with all this free time now. And yeah, there's gonna be a sad scene where he's just in his house, just it's like, well, I can't monitor my people's saves anymore. What do I do? What am I anymore?
Time to reset.
His name doesn't even mean anything anymore. There's your next game about dealing with the personal turmoil.
Yeah, no kidding. That went dark places. Thanks for that, Marcus.
There you go. Rossetti of Solitude.
Marcus ruins Animal Crossing.
It's my new podcast. I'm starting. It'll be when New Horizons comes out.
Time to reset this conversation. So you came up with the topic today for Cuphead. And honestly, I was a little bit surprised, but also just kind of interested to see where you kind of took this idea. And like, I haven't played a ton of Cuphead, just because it came out at a time when I was really busy, and you know, I basically have just been watching the issues around Cuphead kind of evolve. So yeah, why do you think Cuphead is one of the best games of all time?
Okay, so for a little bit of background, game came out in 2017. I think it was September, around the fall time. So it's almost 2 years old now. It recently came out to Switch a couple months ago. And, you know, it's a platformer, run and gun platformer by Studio MDHR. And of course, if you've seen it, the thing that stands out is that it looks like an old-timey cartoon. And I think I've played the game twice. Like, I played it at launch on Xbox, and I reviewed the Switch version for Screen Rant a month or so ago. And having played it twice, I can confirm, at least in my mind, that that game is as close to a near perfect one of those as it can get. So the big thing with that game is that it's challenging. It's a very hard game, and you might not guess that looking at it because it's got a very, you know, whimsical look about it. But it's such a pure challenge. Like, it's a very simple game where the entire game is just a series, for the most part, a series of boss fights, you know. And it's kind of like in the Dark Souls sense where it's very much a you versus the game kind of challenge, where it all comes down to just execution and timing and, you know, memorizing patterns. And I think that it has some of the best boss design and boss battles that I've seen this generation, because every boss is so different from each other and so unique. They're just so imaginative. There's like two frogs that are boxing and take on turn into a slot machine. There's a bee lady, and you're like, it's like an auto-scrolling level where you're going up in her beehive and she's sending her minions at you. There's a dragon that you fight in like an aerial battle, and like a plane who's coming at you. And every fight has 3 different stages that you go through. And every stage they transform into a new form. And so the fight's always evolving, where like you think you've mastered the first part and then they throw something else at you and you're like, okay, I gotta get through this. And the transformations are not only fun to watch just because of how beautiful the animation is, but it always keeps you on your toes. And it's so well designed. Like, the controls are so tight that even though it's very difficult, you always feel like you can beat something. And when you do die, you know why you die. Like, it's always your fault. And which is, you know, the key to making a hard game, is that you can make it hard as long as it's not the game. It's, you know, when you can always look to yourself like, okay, I know what I did wrong, then that's usually a good sign that your game is balanced very well. And I think Cuphead nails that. especially in a generation where difficult games have kind of made a comeback, kind of like games that want to rely on like an old school 80s, early 90s difficulty. And yeah, how much have you played of it, Jack? I'm curious.
Not a ton. Like, and what I did play was a long time ago, so
Yeah.
Like I said, a lot of what I was paying attention to is more like the conversations around it, because honestly, like, side-scrolling shooters aren't really generally my thing. Like, I tend to be not very good at them, and so I'm definitely interested in playing, like, sitting down and just like playing through it straight one day. But no, I like you, I was really interested in like the animation and the style that this game came in, and just the way it just doesn't look like anything else, right?
No.
So I was wondering, like, this game is crazy popular. Like, it's been ported to pretty much everything, and by everything I mean, like, yeah, it's on like the Switch and PC, and I think on Xbox as well. I'm not sure about PlayStation 4.
Yeah, not PlayStation yet.
But it's also gonna come out on Tesla cars. Like, it's
just
a
so
big
weird.
deal. Yeah, it's really weird.
Of all the games to choose from, I mean, I guess that Elon Musk must obviously played it and was like, man, this is cool. Do you know what would be great if this was in a car? Like, if that was my ideal scenario, like, the only thing missing is I just wish I was in a car seat and just in the back playing this. I would just, hey, wait, I have money. I can do that.
You'd be in the front, in the driver's seat, playing while it's driving itself.
Wait, really? Is it in the front? I assumed it'd be like in the back, like with the head seat screens.
I mean,
can you play it in the front?
Maybe I don't know. I guess I assumed it was in like that. There's like a giant touch screen in the front.
Okay, I just
assumed
assumed
it was
for
on that.
Safety reasons you would just put it in the back, but I guess you could put it in the front for the passenger. That's a very
It's also a self-driving car, which technically you're not, like, you're supposed to keep your hands on the wheel, but I think a lot of people just don't.
Screw that. I saw a Minority Report, iRobot. They don't keep their hands on the wheel. So,
and we all know those were facts. Those were documentaries.
Will Smith was doing all kinds of things in his self-driving car. He probably would have been playing Cuphead if it was out back then.
Yeah, he earned it after his heroism in Independence Day.
I mean, if he could shoot down aliens with that precision, I'm sure he would do fine in Cuphead. The difficulty would be nothing to him. Probably rap about it.
So I was wondering, like, because there's also like an animated series that's in the works, I think, coming to Netflix.
Yeah, that was recently announced.
Yeah.
Was it The Adventures of Cuphead or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking, because there was a piece published in Unwinnable back in 2017, I think around the time Cuphead came out. And it was about how Cuphead uses its art style, and like I'm pretty sure we also talked about that in like our Game of the Year episodes for 2017. Maybe 2018. Someone check the tapes. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to like kind of revisit that and see like how your thoughts have kind of evolved on that, because like obviously it's like one thing to have like the game and be like, well, it's different, it's divorced from like animation because it's a game, and like they're not really trying to tackle those racial issues. But now it's also being made into an animation, and the whole, I guess for listeners who haven't listened to either the best of 2017 or the best of 2018 episode, whichever that ends up being, but like the controversy around that wasn't so much like, gasp, Cuphead uses this old-timey animation style and that makes Cuphead racist. It's more that animation style has a history of being associated with like racial stereotyping, and kind of laid the groundwork for basically like the continuation of kind of minstrel shows, but in animated form. And then when that became no longer appropriate, like black characters were just kind of jettisoned from animation pretty much entirely for like 50 years. And so like this style of animation is very much associated with that sort of thing, as well as gambling and the like I believe the Dice Man is based off of Cab Calloway, who is also a huge inspiration for a lot of animation at the time for black characters. So like even though the game is kind of cleaned up, it still uses this animation, and that animation style comes with a lot of this basically historical baggage.
Yeah.
And the game doesn't really want to deal with that, which is understandable, but that the article, and if anyone wants to read it for themselves, it's called Cuphead and the Racist Spectre of Fleischer Animation by Yusuf Cole on Unwinnable. But basically, the general conceit is like the best, you can't really divorce the art style from that historical baggage, and so really the productive thing to do would be to have something in the game that addresses that rather than just kind of ignores it or pretends like that baggage doesn't exist. And I wanted to hear your thoughts, because the artistic designers of the game gave their thoughts, and their thoughts were, it's just an art style.
Yeah.
Which, okay.
Yeah, I mean, my thing, like, I honestly, I wasn't even, like, aware or, like, or I'd forgotten the whole baggage that the animation style had. You know, I just looked at it, I was like, oh yeah, it looks like those little cartoons, cool. You know, like,
Yeah.
I like watching those little cartoons, great. That
For sure.
No one's ever done this. And so, like, honestly, until people started bringing it up, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. But like, I remember hearing it might have, like you said, the brothers' response. I don't know if it was the same response. I know they gave an initial reaction that was similar to like, oh, like, you know, we weren't trying, you know, basically like, oh, we're not trying to be racist. we just like the look of it. That's all. Which on one hand, I'm like, yeah, I figured that would be, because there's no people in the game, really. There's maybe like two or three characters that are like human. Everyone else is like a sentient like object or animal or something. So, you know, it doesn't really show. And honestly, it doesn't bother me, I guess, being a black man, that baggage, because it's like, okay, well, I you know, I can tell the intent. Like, there's no ill intent here. They just thought it was a cool style, which, I mean, I'm not going to lie and say, like, it is a cool style. I mean, it's got an unfortunate kind of, like I said, history behind it. But, you know, not every cartoon, you know, was going for that. But at the same time, there were more than a few of them totally were, you know, with those less than desirable caricatures, I guess we'll say. But, yeah, ultimately, like, I think it looks cool, and it doesn't personally bother me, because and it also doesn't bother me that the game doesn't try to like tackle it. I don't know how the game would, because the game is so, you know what I mean? It's so whimsical. Like, I don't know what they would say or do, like, in the story wise, because the whole story is just about these two kids basically trying to, you know, get out of their deal with the devil, and that's about it. You just go around collecting soul contracts from all these the devil's debtors, I guess. And I don't know where you would fit in. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I didn't feel a need playing it for that, because like I just liked it for what it is, of just being this fun little whimsical thing that has an art style. So I think it really, like, I'm not really fazed by it personally, like, at all. You know, like, I acknowledge the unfortunate history the art style has, but the developers aren't, you know, supporting it, at least not supporting the dark side of it. Like I said, they just look like, oh, it just looked like a cool art style. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it is a cool art style, and it can be used for good, I guess, you know?
Yeah, I was trying to think of like good like analogous things because something that like people would have more of an association with, because I think especially like now a lot of people are kind of in the same boat like as you, where like they just didn't really think about it because it's the 1930s. It was like 90 years ago. um but so I was thinking like what's something that might be like that existed back then where if you tried to put it and like repackage it now without the like without the historical baggage, where it would become like a big problem. And I think there are a couple examples, but I think a lot of what I hit on was stuff related to like the action adventure serials from the 1920s and 30s, or even the 1950s. So like, remember that reboot of The Lone Ranger that came out?
Johnny Depp?
With Johnny Depp as a Native American man?
Oh yeah, I never saw it, but I heard it was bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least some of that is due to the fact that like you did things in the 1950s and they don't really translate well now. Yeah. You know, like there are just some tropes there that don't work, and I think like the same can be said for like Indiana Jones, especially like the Temple of Doom. There's a ton like that movie in general is just a smorgasbord of things that just don't fly anymore, even if you ignored the fact that it has its roots in like adventure serials, just from like then to now. Like the way it treats its female characters, the way Indian people are portrayed, Chinese people. It's messy, and I think and I think part of it is that it tries to take that stuff and bring it into the present without really addressing any of the historical baggage that came along with those action adventure shorts when they originally aired. Like, I don't know. It just seemed like it was kind of analogous, and I don't really have like a super concrete point. It was just like some general thoughts and brainstorms that I had going on.
Yeah. And I don't think it's bad that, you know, people are discussing it or bringing it up. 'Cause, you know, it's there. So I get it. But again, for me, it was a more or less a complete non-factor. Like, it didn't phase my enjoyment of the game at all.
And now I'm kind of trying to like think, because you brought it up, like how would the game address it? I don't think any of the people who are critiquing the game were like, yeah, that Cuphead character needs to turn to the screen and give a 5-minute lecture on the history of Fleischer animation.
Like at the end of the game, after you beat the super hard, after you get through all the BS with Mr. King Dice and the Devil, and he turns to the screen with Mugman, and they're like, hey kids, we had a lot of fun here, but we need to be serious for a second. You know what's not fun? Racism.
Racial stereotyping.
Yeah, and then Mugman goes into like a 5-minute monologue about, hey guys, don't stereotype. He speaks like they actually speak. You get to hear their voices. They break their own rules. It becomes a talkie. And you know, they sit backwards in a chair and be real with you. Like Mugman is woke, guys. Okay.
Yeah. The game doesn't have to do that. I think there are probably more subtle approaches that can work. But I think for some reason when people like read or listen to criticism of art that's like, hey, the work maybe should engage with this problematic aspect or history a little bit more or at all, they think that change would basically be would just be like a weird like Saturday morning cartoon cutaway to a lecture, and I don't think it has to be that cut and dry.
Yeah. If the game had a physical release, it'd have a back in the box disclaimer saying like, "Hey, there's some mildly racist shit Well,
Yeah.
not even in this game. It's based on some stuff that was mildly kind of racist back in the day, but, we just want you to let you know. It's like this really awkward paragraph that doesn't know where to stop because the guy writing it keeps like, he's like, oh, crap, I don't know how to end this. I think I'm trying to say something here.
I mean, it could be like the intro to those Warner Brother cartoons where they're like, hey, our company made some pretty racist cartoons back in the day, and some of them are in this collection of cartoons, but we're not changing them because we want you to see them as they actually were. But also, they're racist as hell. Something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. But
I mean,
more
you're
like...
too, honestly, if you're playing this game, you're probably too busy trying not to throw your controller at the screen as you're playing than worrying about the history of the game's animation. Not that there's anything wrong with that, again, but yeah, like I said, for me, it doesn't bother me at all. Like, I'm not gonna try to, like, when it was going on around the time, like, there was a part of me that was like, should I be mad about this? And then you kind of have to be like, honestly, like, I'm not gonna fake outrage over this if I'm really not feeling it. So it's like, if people that are passionate about it can talk about it, I'm just gonna keep playing it, having a good time. It's a great game. It's I think it, like I said before, it's definitely one of, perhaps maybe the best indie game of this generation. That's certainly up for debate, but I think it's in the conversation. And it does everything for the most part that it's trying to do exceptionally well. Like, the weakest thing about that game are probably the run and gun segments, which are like the traditional platforming levels that aren't bad at all. They're just pretty weak compared to the epic boss fights that make up like 70% of the game.
Okay.
And God, that music too. That soundtrack is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite soundtracks in recent memory. It's one that I'll turn to every now and then. Just put on. It's got that great old-timey jazz, just really upbeat, really boisterous, and very varied too. Like, it's hard not to have a smile on your face and maybe wag your finger a little bit like you're in the 1920s as you hear that soundtrack playing in the background. Also pumps you up for the boss fights. And another thing that I love about Cuphead that I've constantly praised, I feel like I'm the only one that brings this up just when I hear people talk about it, is that it's got a progress meter in all of the levels, where every time you die, there's like a little bar that shows how far you progressed in the fight or in the level. And that gives you like a clear indicator of how you did. And I think that's one of the smartest little mechanics I've seen in a game in recent memory, because it alleviates the difficulty by letting you know how close you got. So like, you'll see that like, oh man, I was one hit away. Like, and then you just immediately want to try again because you're like, okay, I basically did it. Like, okay, like and it has checkpoints along the way too. So like, okay, I got to the second part of the fight, or I'm about to reach the third phase. Like, okay, I've got these two down. I just got to cross that one barrier. And a lot of other games that don't have something like that, I feel like I'm more likely to walk away from it sooner. But Cuphead, like, I would just keep coming again and again, because just seeing that bar race further and further across the screen every time you played, like, you literally see yourself getting better, and you're like, okay, like, I'm so close, like, I'm getting there, like, I can do this, like, maybe this will be the one. And I think it's something that I would love to see implemented in other similar hard games. Maybe not exactly in that way, but I think it's a little touch, but I think it goes a long way towards keeping you in the game and not rage quitting immediately after dying.
Yeah, so have you had like a lot of experience with these side-scrolling shooter type games? Oh yeah.
I mean, side-scrollers and platformers and stuff like that in general are probably my favorite genre. It's like, like, I'm a big Mega Man fan. And this game, if I had to compare it to anything, it's like a blend of like Contra and Mega Man.
Okay, yeah.
Especially the Contra part, like, I mean, you even get like a spread shot as one of your weapons. So Contra's hard too. And it plays like that, where it's, especially in the run and gun levels where, like Contra, it's throwing everything but the kitchen sink at you at all times. And you're just pretty much, you have no reason to not hold the fire button down and just shooting everything and jumping. And especially when you can play two players at the same time, you get even more of a Contra feel. And it's it plays super tight, the platforming, the shooting, all that stuff feels really good. So I'd say it's as good, if not maybe even better than some of the stuff that it's aping.
Yeah, so would you say it's better than Contra?
It's probably better than the first Contra for sure.
Dang. Okay.
And I've replayed the first Contra, and this is the NES one. I'm not talking about the arcade one. There's different ones, but I replayed the NES Contra. I want to say last year. It's a product of age. I mean, Contra's a hard game, but there's some. I mean, they got similar levels of like hard game BS and shenanigans going on, but Cuphead, and this is purely because of just the difference in times. I'd say Cuphead just plays a little bit better and tighter, a little less BS-y with some of its enemies.
Now, what did you replay Contra on?
God, what did I replay Contra on? Probably, was it on Xbox? I think it was on Xbox, because I have the 360 version, and I played it on my One, just because I was just in the mood for Contra, and I just ran through it in like a night. Yeah. Only because of the Konami code. No human can beat that game without the Konami code. So yeah, so it was like last year on Xbox.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I sometimes wonder, like, because Contra is one of those games that's been ported again and again and again, obviously. And I wonder sometimes if the ports are the things that kind of color our memories of games now, because I guess I remember playing Contra and it being a very tight game, but I haven't played like the original version of it in ages. So like
yeah.
the only reference point I would have for it now is the port, which kind of gets us into a whole issue of like game preservation and stuff like that, which is kind of a huge tangent. But yeah, I guess in your mind, like what's the extra oomph that makes this game not just great, but one of the best games of all time? Like, because clearly you're not alone in that. Like, this game has a 100% positive rating on Steam and something like a high 90s, maybe 98, 97% on Metacritic. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's high praise. So, like, what exactly is pushing this game up so high? Is it purely the mechanics? Is it the style and the soundtrack? Or is it just kind of like everything is great?
I mean, I think with any good game, it's a combination of all those factors. Like, right. No great game can just lean on one thing and everything else is lacking. What impressed me about Cuphead the first time I played it, because before it came out, everyone was enamored primarily with the art style and the presentation. And so, like, my biggest fear going into it was, like, is it just going to be all looks and then no substance? And it's not. Like, it plays as good as it looks, which is a huge relief for me when it came out. It's got, its presentation, its soundtrack, all that stuff is unparalleled almost in some ways in terms of just the attention to detail and authenticity. I mean, there's even like an old-timey film grainy, and some of the voices are all scratchy, like it was recorded on like a device from the day. So that goes a long way in terms of making you feel like I am playing an actual cartoon. Like, this is one of the few video games I went out of way to show family members, which I never do. But because it's in our style, they can speak. You're like, hey, you guys know this. So like that's obviously like 100% top marks, but the game, like I said, like the game isn't overly complicated. It's literally like, hey, here's a bunch of boss battles, and you're just gonna run with your little pea shooter and go beat them all. And it does the little things that it does so well. Like the platforming feels tight, the shooting feels tight, but the bosses are so good. Like, the boss battles are the meat and potatoes of the game, where like all the shooting and platforming won't matter if the bosses themselves aren't fun to fight, and all of them are good, which is insane because there's so many of them. And like, again, like, they're all so different from each other. Like, I can't even say which two are, like, alike in how they attack the player and how their transformations go. Like, getting to the next fight was, like, a feeling of both, like, excitement and dread, because you're dreading, like, oh man, like, I barely beat that last guy. God only knows what's waiting for me next. But at the same time, you're like, oh, I want to see what, because it's so imaginative. Like, I want to see what I'm up against, and the game never disappointed. The animations and watching how the fights play out, like, it's just spectacle after spectacle, and it's just the treat. Like, it's hard. It's weird to say it's hard to not keep smiling, because half the time you're just like furious. But it's a fun kind of difficulty. Like, anyone that's into hard games knows that feeling of like playing a Dark Souls or anything like that. We're like, oh yeah, like, I'm mad, but like, I'm having fun. It's like a fun mad, I guess, you know?
Okay.
I don't know what you would call that combination of emotions, fun and frustrated. Fun-strated? Can we coin that on the show?
Sure, yeah.
I'm
fun-strated.
I'm fun-strated.
I mean, I feel like that describes a lot of, like, when people are saying Dark Souls or Dark Souls-like. I feel like fun-strated really kind of sums that up.
I'm glad you repeated it, because now that 2 people have said it, it's going to be a thing now. So, there you go, world. Fun-strated. Put it on a t-shirt. Make sure you credit myself, Marcus Stewart.
I just had to, like, run it through my head and be like, is there a dick joke in this? No? Okay. It's good to go.
Do you normally run everything through your mind to make sure it's not a dick joke? Does it go through like a dick joke filter?
Yeah, there's a dick filter.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
I have to have one of those now.
But yeah, like, especially when I reviewed Cuphead, I gave it, like, just short of a perfect score, because it's like, I have a hard time finding anything wrong with this game. Like, again, the worst thing I can say is like, oh, the run and gun levels are the least good thing. And like I said, they're not bad, they're just least good. But all the few things that it tries to do, it knocks everything out of the park. And there's few games that can say that, just like a constant series of home runs up to the very end. It's just a thrill ride. And to me, yeah, that would put it in a conversation. Like, it's easily one of the best games of this generation, hands down. And I think it deserves to be up there, and it probably will be remembered as one of the best kind of, like, action platformers ever made.
So what you said you gave it an almost perfect score. So, like, what?
It was like because for Screen Rant, it's like a 5-star system. I gave it like 4.5, which is right below a 5. So. Yeah,
but what held it back?
Oh, the run and gun levels.
Oh, okay.
Like, that's the only criticism I can lob at the game. And again, it's like they're like the only thing I have problem with outside of them being like less fun than the boss battles is that the dealing with death in the run and gun levels is a little less tolerable than in the boss fights, because with the run and gun levels, it's harder to have to run through a series of really hard platforming sections and a series of enemies than it is to just fight a singular really epic boss battle. Mm-hmm. Like getting past like a long section of like, oh, I just jumped over all this crazy stuff and then I died in a thing, like I gotta do all that again. It's like I sigh a little bit harder than I would if like, oh, I just gotta fight this guy again. Like, yeah, he's hard, but like it's one person and the fight is just more fun than having to jump through 50 hoops again.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, sometimes literally 50 hoops.
Yeah, while being shot at all sides and the hoops are on fire.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I guess I'm going to kind of like step away from giving my judgment, because I admitted like I haven't really played this game enough to really have a super informed opinion about it.
Yeah.
I just, like I said, found the conversation around the animation style, and like people seem to have a really strong reaction to that one point of criticism. Like, that Unwinnable article was like one of the only people to bring it up. I think there was another article in New York Mag by Samantha Blackmon, which is referenced in the Unwinnable article. And that, like, those two are really the two prominent voices that I heard speaking up about, like, the presentation of the animation and kind of, like, bringing up that side of it. And I found that to be, like, really interesting because it's not a point we usually hear about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I found all of that really interesting and, like, just kind of, I don't know, I think it's always good to think about, like, where things have come from and, like, the wider context, because I think if we ignore the wider context, sometimes things lose meaning that they should probably still have. But yeah, I'm really glad that Cuphead is doing well. I think they have a new piece of DLC that's coming out in the relatively near future. I think it just got delayed until 2020.
Yeah, so who knows? Could be a year out for all we know, which I was let down by. I was like, because that looks really good. Play as Miss Chalice.
Yeah, but they are saying that they're delaying it so that, like, you know, they aren't killing their workers, so that's probably a good thing.
They're a small team, but I think they announced the game sold, I think, 4 million now, which is that's a pretty good number for a game of that, I guess, budget of that size. So
yeah, well, and I was looking at just kind of their team. This was almost like a family affair. I mean, it was a family affair, really. Like, it's Chad and Jared Moldenhauer who are the directors, but then there's, like, Maria Moldenhauer and Ryan Moldenhauer who were producing it, and, like, that's interesting to me, I guess. Yeah, I wanted to hear more about that, but I couldn't really find a whole lot more.
The only thing I remember hearing, I want to say Game Informer wrote a thing, I think it was right before it came out, was just talking about how they were able to capture the animation style and how they went as far as to actually, like, use the old animation cells, like that old technique, to do a lot of the animations, like the thing where they would put the sheets of paper under, like, the clear glass thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think they still do that now because a lot of it's computerized, but I remember reading that and I was like, oh, that's awesome, just as a nerd for animation. And again, going back to how much that game kind of strives for authenticity, I thought that was a really cool thing to read. But yeah, like those brothers, those Moldenhauers, just really shooting for the stars and achieving.
Yeah.
Also, that Switch version is phenomenal. That is a fantastic Switch game. The only problem, and I said this in my review, is that the Switch version should probably come with a wrist strap, because the Switch is Switch is a very throwable device. Even more so now, because we got a light version of it coming out. So,
oh yeah, what are your thoughts on the Nintendo Switch Lite?
I'm gonna echo Alex Navarro from GameSpot and say that they missed an opportunity to call it the Light Switch. I think it's cool. I'm jealous of that D-pad, but I get why the D-pad's like that, because you can't turn the Joy-Con sideways, so there's no need for it to be 4 buttons. I won't buy one. I don't really need one for, like, me personally, but I think it's a really smart idea and a really cool idea, because I know a lot of friends that have Switches that play it almost exclusively undocked. So
yeah, I mean, I can't remember the last time I docked mine, so
yeah, like, I tend to be almost 50-50. Okay. So for me, it's like, I don't need it, but I think it's a really smart idea, and they're gonna sell a gazillion of those things. I don't know if I like any of the colors. Like, I think they're fine, but none of the colors were, like, must-have to me. I think the Pokemon one was the coolest one, and I'm not even, like, super into Pokemon.
So, one last thing. Like, what do you think resonated with people about Cuphead more so than, like, say, Gradius? Because, like, people like Gradius, but it's, like, a very much a niche kind of thing, whereas Cuphead seems to be kind of more of a phenomenon.
It's about, like Konami, like that Gradius? Like old Gradius?
Yeah, like old Gradius. Like the side-scrolling shooter.
I mean, it's hard, because Gradius is so different. Like, you know, Gradius is like a ship shooting, like...
Gradius was just like an example, but like,
oh, okay. I was like Gradius,
a lot of the games that, like, would fall into this category tend to be much more niche. You
I
know,
will
especially
say,
now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I want to directly compare it to something back in the day, because like those games got their attention in their time era for different reasons than similar games now would. I mean, number one for Cuphead is that art style. Like, that game turns heads. Like, you look at that, when that game made its kind of mainstream debut in that Xbox indie showcase at like E3 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah,
like it was on screen for like 2 seconds, and that was the game people picked up. Like, well, what was that? Like, wait, can we rewind? Go back to whatever that was. Like, that game will always stand out because nothing looks like it. And not only does nothing look like it, but it's an appealing art style. Like, you look at it like, oh, that just looks cool. Like, I want to try whatever that is.
Yeah, the only thing I can really think of off the top of my head that even looks similar is Bendy and the Ink Machine, but that's like much more off-putting.
And that came out after, too. So, like, Cuphead was already out like a year when Bendy came out. So,
really? Wasn't Bendy in like a weird early access limbo for a really long time?
I think kind of, but like, you know, like I hadn't even heard of Bendy till it came out. And by the time it came out, Cuphead had already cemented itself in terms of its popularity. So it's kind of like, if you weren't aware it was early access, you might look at Bendy and be like, oh, it's doing the Cuphead thing. You know?
Yeah.
So it's always going to be second banana to Cuphead, no matter when it, you know, first became playable or whatever. So yeah, like that kind of goes into why I think Cuphead will always have it's going to be memorable for, you know, generations to come. It's going to be like, it just stands out just of that look, the art style. I mean, more so because that Netflix series coming out, so now it's like a multimedia thing. You don't see that with a lot of games in general, let alone like an indie game.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with that presentation. And then it helps that if you actually go out and play it, you're like, holy crap, this is really good. Also, I'm getting my ass kicked. But in a way, like, I know some people, especially when it came out, were kind of bemoaning the difficulty because they wanted to enjoy what it had to offer, and maybe the difficulty was a bit of a barrier to it.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, to me, that kind of makes it stand out even more, or make it more memorable, because I feel like if it was just kind of a middle-of-the-road, kind of like medium average difficulty game, it would in a way be more forgettable. Like, something about it looking the way it does and also being like hard as hell makes it even more of a kind of a unique package to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just another like talking point of like, this game's hard as hell, and you're like, really? You're like, oh yeah, give it a try. Kind of like when Ori and the Blind Forest came out, it had the same thing of like, that has a deceptively, you know, oh, this looks like a easy kids game. It's really whimsical. And then you're like, oh, this thing's destroying me.
It's both really inviting and also at the same time, like, pushing back against you.
Yeah, it's like, hey, come on in. And then as soon as you come in, it's like, you're going to learn today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to be talking about Cuphead for, I think, a long time.
For sure.
And, yeah.
Well, so I guess final appeal to Cuphead being the best game of all time, or one of the best games of all time.
It is flawless for the most part, near flawless, and everything that it tries to execute, which should be what anything that could be considered the best games period should aspire to be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, you know, maybe the only reason I could see people scoffing at Cuphead is because it's quote-unquote new. And you're like, well, it's too soon to say. I mean, it's almost 2 years old at this point. But, you know, for something to come out and have that impact immediately, like, you know, if you look past the, like, well, it's new, I think it's very, very hard to deny it being considered already as one of the best games ever. Like I said, it's already one of the best games of this current generation, like, hands down, no debate. And I challenge you to find a game similar to it that, you know, maybe is better or is as almost nearly flawless as Cuphead. Because then if you do find a game that compares to it, it's probably one of the best games ever. You know? So if you can compare the best games ever to Cuphead and say that they're neck to neck, would Cuphead not also be considered one of the best games ever?
Okay.
I'm just saying.
It's a good final words. All right, Marcus Stewart, where can people find you online?
Hey, you can find me on the Twitter machine at Marcus Stewart 7, which is the number 7. And you can also find me on YouTube on my channel. It's Marcus Makes Media. Where you can also find me on SoundCloud, because I have a podcast of my own. It's also at Marcus Makes Media on SoundCloud. And you can also listen on iTunes, which is Marcus Writes About Games, which is also the name of my blog, where you can follow all of my writing exploits, marcuswritesAboutGames.wordpress.com. And you can also find me on Screen Rant. I write games reviews over there on the regular, so follow me there when you want to hear my written thoughts on video games.
All right. As for this podcast, we occasionally have Marcus Stewart on to discuss video games. I believe you've also been on to talk about Mortal Kombat.
Yes, and Sonic, I think was another one.
Yeah. Sonic 2?
Yeah, Sonic 2.
Yep. And you are also on another podcast that I produce called We Wanted Adventurers, which is a Dungeons and Dragons live play adventure that is rapidly approaching its season 1 conclusion. That releases every Wednesday. You can find it on iTunes, Libsyn, SoundCloud, basically all of the podcasting places. And same goes for the Best Games Period. You can find us on, again, Libsyn, SoundCloud, iTunes. We're on Stitcher. I believe now we are also on that music streaming service, Spotify.
You know the one.
That one. And you can also find us on community.extra-life.org. And if you haven't heard of Extra Life before, it is a fantastic charity. It's part of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals. And basically, people get together and play games and raise money for sick and injured kids in hospitals all across the United States and Canada. It's really, really great. So you can learn more over at extra-life.org. And if you decide to sign up, you can actually choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital you want to support, and 100% of everything you raise goes directly to that hospital to help the sick and injured kids there. So, yeah, it's pretty great. So check that out. And again, if you want to find cool podcasts or interesting articles that a couple of which may or may not be written by Marcus Stewart himself,
just
over
a few
on community.extra-life.org. And yeah, if you are a fan of this podcast, please follow us on Twitter at Best Games Period. Leave us a review, like us, retweet us, all of that good stuff. We also have an Instagram and a Facebook page. And we also have a Patreon. So if you really enjoy and have spent a lot of time listening to the podcast so far, please head over to Patreon and maybe drop us $1 every month, and you'll get access to unique shows that are only available to our Patreon supporters. And you'll help us make new content in the future and keep doing what we're doing. So head over to patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. With that, Marcus, do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Well, parting is such sweet sorrow. And that's it. That was the words. I was thinking of Animaniacs, so I decided to go with that reference, which isn't even from Animaniacs. It was Animaniacs referencing an old movie, but I thought of Dot from Animaniacs, which is, an old-timey cartoon like Cuphead, so it kind of works. And it's also getting a new show next year, so, like Cuphead. You see how I put all that together flawlessly?
We'll see you on the flippity-dippity.